Hey guys, so today I'd like us to talk about passive versus active investing. And by active, I don't mean if you are self-directing, your account and you are personally managing your account. That's not what I mean. It's active in the sense of a mutual fund where you have like some fund manager and a team that's managing it for you. So that would be mutual fund. And then the passive aspect would be index funds or ETFs. So active investing, like I just said, so it's typically where, you are paying people to buy and sell stocks for you, usually through mutual funds, versus passively managed funds would be, so ETFs or index funds, where, you are investing into an index. So that fund, would track that index very closely. So active investing actually try to beat the market, Passive investing, on the other hand, is just try to replicate the market as closely as possible. And for the longest time, actively managed fund was really the way that people thought that they had to go. So before 1976, which was the first time an index fund was introduced, people were only investing in actively managed funds, And it would have been horrendous to think that something that wasn't managed by very smart people would actually perform better than the managed version. And well, that's how it went for several years, and even in 1976, when they first introduced that first index fund, a lot of people were looking at that and, laughing, being like, how is that going to perform better than my fund, that's being managed by some very smart and highly paid people. So it is true that, in some cases, there have been some very good fund managers that year over year outperform the market. For example, Peter Lynch, who was the manager of Fidelity Fund between 1977 and 1990. On average, over the full time where he managed that fund, he had a return of 29.2%, which is much better than the market. But those are, edge cases. Like it's not the norm, as we'll see later in the video. In the past few years, as more data has been gathered and more studies came out, it's year over year, it's been shown that index funds typically, or at least funds that follows an index, work and perform better than the managed version. So why is that? First of all, it's hard for a fund manager or like a fund that's actively managed to beat the market. And even if they manage to either, come close to the market or even outperform it slightly, the problem is that these funds come with high expenses ratio, like high management expense ratio. There's also extra costs that come your way when you invest in some of those funds, as well as it's not as tax efficient. And so all these put together means that even if the fund is outperforming the market slightly, all these fees that you're going to pay, all that money is going to, outweigh the benefit that the managed portion had. And to come back to the tax portion that's not as efficient with a mutual fund, one reason is that in a mutual fund, because they try to beat the market and so they buy and sell a lot of stocks in order to do so, or try to do so. When you buy and when you sell, well, mostly when you sell, you have capital gains. Even if you sell at a loss, you have capital gains. And so over the course of the year, they're going to sell a lot of stocks, and they're going to create a lot of capital gains, even if it comes at a loss. And so these capital gains are actually being trickled down back to people who invest in that fund, which means that you are going to pay a lot of taxes, or at least much more taxes, if you are in a managed fund. One downside as well of managed fund is that the fund manager, over the course of the life of the fund, might change his strategy, over the years. He might change slightly, and then what you invested in at first might not really fit what you want to invest in now because it's changed. Another point is that the fund manager, might be replaced entirely, and then a completely new way of managing the fund might come into play, as well as the fact that a lot of funds over the years, if you look at a bigger time window, a lot of funds either get bought back and merged together, or some of them get dissolved completely. And so that's things to keep into mind when you invest into actively managed funds. And one thing that's, that we can find sometimes people saying is that a fund manager is basically just a glorified salesperson, simply because they just try to attract more capital into the fund. Okay, so they're gonna sing, sweet things to your ear just to, have you put more money into the fund. Because in the end, the more money they have in the fund, the more money they are making. So it's only a benefit for them to attract more capital. And one point is that more and more people over the years slowly shift gear and go away from the managed fund, so like a mutual fund, and instead transfer the money into ETFs or index funds. And so the benefit of an index fund or an ETF is that they carry a much lower management expense ratio, and fee-wise overall it's much lower. And the reason why is that they don't try to beat the market, they try to be the market. They just try to replicate whatever index they are trying to follow. And for that, they don't need to trade as much, buy and sell a lot of stocks. All they do is rebalancing on a regular basis the fund just to track back the index that they are supposed to be tracking. And because of that, it's way more tax efficient, okay? So you will still pay some tax because there's still some capital gains when they rebalance the fund. You might have some dividend gains as well, in which case you would pay some taxes there. But overall, if you compare the two, it is way more, I would say, fee-wise and tax-wise, way more interesting to invest into an ETF or an index fund. So something to keep in mind when you make a decision to know where you want to place your money. And one thing to keep in mind is no matter where you put your money, whether it is in an actively managed fund or a passively managed fund, is when you sell your stocks or your ETFs, ETF or your index fund, you will pay taxes on the capital gains, okay? Unless, of course, you invested into some kind of tax-free account. So in Canada, it would be maybe RSP for when you retire, or the TFSA, in which case you wouldn't pay taxes on your capital gains. And if you don't trust a random guy on YouTube, maybe you'll trust Warren Buffett. And here is a letter that he wrote a while back. And here is what it says. My advice to the trustee couldn't be more simple. Put 10% of the cash in short-term government bonds and 90% in a very low-cost S&P 500 fund. And he's recommending Vanguard's. I believe the trustee's long-term result from this policy will be superior to those attained by most investors. Whether pension funds, institutions, or individuals who employ high-fee managers. Both individuals and institutions will constantly be urged to be active by those who profit from giving advice and effecting transactions. The resulting frictional costs can be huge, and for investors in aggregate, devoid of benefits. So ignore the chatter, keep your costs minimal, and invest in stocks as you would invest in a farm. And what he's saying here is what we've said throughout this video. Basically, be careful of highly managed funds, that have high fees. Instead, look into passively managed index funds like ETFs that follow some kind of index. Now, one point with ETF, one downside, because it's not all perfect, there's one downside, is that ETFs are being traded the same way as you trade stocks. So when you decide to start using ETF as your investment vehicle, you want to make sure that you choose a broker that doesn't charge, crazy fees when you buy and sell. Otherwise it's going to eat into the cost. So try to find a broker out there that doesn't charge you any fees when you buy and when you sell ETFs. Now, one other fact as well to keep into mind is that ETFs are being traded like stocks. And so for some people, that's a benefit. But for others out there, especially beginners, it could be a downside because it means that they can buy and sell so easily, and they could be prey to their emotions. One day they see it coming down, and then right away they start selling at a loss. Now I want to touch base on one interesting concept, which is called like a closet fund, okay? Which is basically a seemingly actively managed fund, which is basically not so active. They just follow very closely an index. And those type of funds can actually be found by looking at the R-squared value, not by you necessarily, okay? There's people who do the studies for you and which measure and track the performance of the fund compared to an index fund. So they take this mutual fund, compare it to a bunch of different indexes, and they calculate this R-squared value. And that's going to tell you if that mutual fund is tracking that index very closely. And so in investing, the R-squared is generally interpreted as the percentage of a fund or a security movement that can be explained by a movement in a benchmark index. So if an actively managed fund happen to have an R-square value of 1 to one of these index fund, well, it means that it is tracking it perfectly. And this R-squared value is actually used to find those closed funds. And it's been shown that 30% of actively traded funds have a R-squared value of 0.9, which shows that a lot of actively traded funds actually are inspired themselves from indexes. And you can find also this R-squared value for actually index fund and ETFs. And that's used to make sure that they are actually following the index, because that's what you want in that case. If they are not tracking it, they're not doing their job properly. So you want to make sure that an ETF has a R-square value to the benchmark index that you're trying to follow of 1, or as close to 1 as you can. And so I don't want to make you think that I'm saying that there's no way a mutual fund is going to outperform the market. That's not what we're saying. We're just saying that in most cases that's just the case. And we're gonna see in that study that we'll dive into a bit later, just after that, which, there's cases where mutual funds are going to outperform the market over a 10 or 15 year period. But in most cases, 90% and up, it's not the case. So actually we'll dive into a SPIVA study, which is S&P indices versus active, which they do a report every year to track and see how are the mutual fund versus index fund performing. They're just simply trying to answer one question, which is, can active managers beat the index? And so we're gonna look at that study here, the SPIVA 2020, and I'm gonna put the link down below. So that's for the Q1 of 2020. And so as you can see here in this website, if you compare, the benchmark versus the actively managed fund, in pretty much every place you look at, the benchmark is actually outperforming the managed fund here. So for stocks, in that case, the US equity, you can see at least, no matter what, even for real estate, 81.7% of benchmarks outperform the mutual funds. And then it's true for all the other categories. If you go down to international equity, same thing. I mean, there's here a small cap, maybe, is performing very similarly, but still, passively managed funds are outperforming. For fixed income, in some cases it's even huge. Here, some places it's 99%, 99, here 86, 97, 90, 98. 100% in some cases, it is huge, okay? So I really recommend you to read that report. I think it's very enlightening and will give you some, strong data to justify and convince you to go to the passively managed fund. So I'll link this document down below so you guys can go over it more in detail. So that's all I have for today regarding the active versus passively managed fund. I hope you learned one thing or two. If you did, please leave a like and subscribe. Subscribing is very important for me, just so that I can build up on that subscriber base, which will help my channel grow and get more visibility from YouTube. So hopefully this channel grows to be something bigger than what it is now. So thanks for your support, guys, and I'll see you in the next video. Thank you.